In 1982, Blade Runner snuck his way into the audience's eyeballs, and the response was a loud, "Please stop, get the hell out of my face." Most people by now know that Blade Runner was not exactly well received at release.
The story doesn't build, it dilutes, which is a great shame. In a way, the pace of the film is sacrificed on the altar of style.
Internet's favorite movie critic, Roger Ebert, called it a failure as a story, and one review in particular by Pauline Kael felt so harsh and cruel to Ridley Scott he went on record saying he stopped reading critics from that moment onwards.
Pauline Kael killed me in 3 pages on Blade Runner. 3 pages of destruction. So from that moment on, I never read any more press.
I think listening to some criticism might have helped you a bit, Ridley. Blade Runner, however, went on to become the cult classic we are all familiar with, so the money man at Warner Bros. Smelled the sweet, sweet perfume of cold cash and realized that re-releasing it was a good idea. The 1992 director's cut of Blade Runner, and the 2007 final cut version too, I guess, finally gave Scott the opportunity to realize his original vision for the movie by, for instance, removing the obnoxious voiceover narration. But Blade Runner also did something you don't always get in director's cut editions. Some of them look like crap, some of them are poorly paced, others offer extra insight on the characters or just provide more content for diehard fans. But Blade Runner director's cut was different. It changed the interpretation of the story. Spoilers for an over 40 years old movie. One of the originally cut scenes reframes the movie and invites the viewer to wonder whether or not the protagonist, Rick Deckard, is an android like the ones he's hired to destroy. This was a massive change and a definitive improvement over the original. And really, those voiceovers sucked, thank God they're gone. At the same time though, people who watched the original theatrical cut are entitled to see and prefer that one. The one with an overbearing narration that ensures you don't have to engage with the movie. The one that gives you a nice happy ending. Aww, how cute. Now, I don't want to make a whole video about director's cuts, cause I'd end up ripping off a longer, more nuanced essay on the topic, and you know how that guy feels about plagiarism. The point I want to make here is that Blade Runner couldn't provide the artist's original vision, but even after he had the opportunity, all its versions remained available. They have distinct names, so you don't risk watching the one you don't want to. Recent releases contain all of them in one package. Now, let me ask you, what game are you about to play here? A mediocre one? Yes, true, but aside from that, you think you're about to play Stellar Blade, right? No! You're playing Stellar Blade 1.014.001. This one has extended endings, and it doesn't feature those, misinterpretable graffiti. You're getting the version the publisher wants, but it's also a version that only added extra context the developers wanted to give players, and that graffiti, no sane person would take issue with that. Did I stutter? But this opens the floodgates for anything. For changes that could be more consequential, like an attempt to reframe the game's story and characters in an effort to improve it. I mean, I don't think that's possible with Stellar Blade unless you start the game with a nuke obliterating the entire cast, but that's beside the point. If I bought a spicy painting of Goku and Vegeta giving each other sweet kisses, I would not accept the artist barging into my house and replace Vegeta with Chi-Chi because it would be the Christian thing to do. They would be allowed to make a new version of their own work and release it separately. Their director's cut. Although this one had no reason to be called as such, but whatever, let Kojima satisfy his Hollywood dreams. But with games, artists have a easier time sneaking in an update to improve them. And Hades 2 got Chi-Chi'd all around the block like a cheap escort. Now listen, I really liked Hades 2. Look, it's even in my top 10 of 2025. But also, I think I hate this thing. Too much? Deal with it. For the 5 people out of the loop, Hades 2 tells the story of Melinoe in her quest to defeat the Titan Kronos and bring balance to the world through the power of a very cliché plot. But at the very end, her and her mentor's plan is jeopardized by Melinoe's brother, Zagreus, the protagonist of the first Hades. He's a good boy, he wants to hurt no one, so he uses those puppy eyes to convince everyone to give Kronos a chance to redeem himself. Aww, how cute, how nice, how shite. Months of waiting since the moment the early access opened the gates of the underworld led to an ending where a character that was barely there swept the rug under your feet, turning into the real hero. And I agree with the fans. This is a poorly written ending that doesn't bring any form of closure to the protagonist's character arc. She starts off wanting to kill Kronos, she ends wanting to kill Kronos, and she doesn't kill Kronos because a dude says so. Mansplaining was all the rage in the Olympus after all. That's what I'd say if I had experienced this ending. But I didn't. In my ending, Melinoi worked alongside Zagreus. Kronos getting a chance to reunite with his family was the plan B they concocted all along. That's because I didn't play Hades 2. I played Hades 2 Patch 1 version, the one the devs released after seeing how pissed the players were. Players' backlash leading a dev team to release corrections of sort to their ending isn't really new, okay? I sure as hell haven't forgotten Mass Effect 3, remember that one? When BioWare's epic tale of wars amongst the stars ended with the player having to pick one of three options, basically voiding all the choices made throughout the trilogy and... Wait, what's this footage of Deus Ex doing here? BioWare caved, the extended cut DLC was released, players were happy they got to see a slideshow, and the ending still sucked. Mass Effect 3's additions, however, didn't change the core of the story. They were just expansions that didn't corrupt the writer's original concept. Hades 2 completely changed Melinoi's arc and motivations. And this is not a Blade Runner situation where Supergiant Games was influenced by an external publisher during development and got a chance to restore content afterwards. They're self-published, that was their idea, but they changed it because players told them to. Because player feedback is the core of their development process, they say. First of all, I call bullshit on that. You want me to believe that in the span of a single month you had the time to evaluate players' reactions, have your writers come up with hundreds of new lines, call the actors to record them, and still deliver it with your first major update post-release? Did you guys hire the real-life Kronos to make this thing? Whether this is true or not is irrelevant though, because now they openly admitted that player feedback doesn't stop at improving the gameplay experience with fine-tuning, and that's even worse, isn't it? Here you have a group of talented writers who work their asses to bring their own vision, and they just happen to not do a great job. That's what art is all about, isn't it? It's not a perfect process, and mistakes are part of it. They wanted to write Zagreus as the paragon of kindness and Melinoi as the wrath of vengeance, but they didn't manage to write it in a more coherent and satisfying way. Rather than moving on and learning from their mistakes, they instead claim that they're ready to sacrifice their own core artistic ideas to satisfy the audience. They proudly claim they commodified their own art. Well, they should have probably followed Melinoi's Plan B idea and abort this mockery from the get-go. Because once you do that, where does it end? What if players said that the entirety of the Olympus route was bad and boring? What if they all complained that you shouldn't have any crafting whatsoever? What if most people hated Nemesis? Would they just press delete on all that? How much of Hades 2 would still be Supergiant's Hades 2 and not just Hades 2 Community Edition? We're already living in a time where some people salivate at the idea of being able to reshape and twist a product with the press of a button, where AI can fix a movie's ending to your taste or yassify Lara Croft's jawline for your pleasure. Because that's what really matters in a game, yeah? The fact it was not ChatGPT making the changes to Hades 2 doesn't really change the fact Supergiant bowed down to this mentality. And don't get me wrong, I love game updates, more than the average person probably. We look at the past with rose-tinted glasses and tend to forget how utterly broken games could be. Oh, Shadow, you could have been such a gem had the camera been fixed post-release. Okay, maybe not, but it would have been a start. Cyberpunk was a mess, and it could have stayed as such. Not to justify the fact it was sold with enough bugs to classify it as an Australian state, but at least updates allowed the gem of a game to be brought up to light for all to enjoy. Its body was polished, but the core remained intact. I can't say the same about Hades 2. Supergiant erased the original vision, and there's no option for me to select it. There's no distinction between theatrical, directors, and feedback-driven cut. I really respect these developers. They're competent, hardworking people who created one of the most fun experiences of the last year. But how can I respect their craft when they themselves admitted not to respect it in the first place? Also, even with the new ending, the story of Hades 2 fucking sucks.